For 7 years, my wife's family called me the charity case. When I got rich, they suddenly didn't remember signing a prenup. Her aunt even brought a lawyer to dinner. So I smiled, unzipped my bag, and what I pulled out left every one of them speechless. I, 34 never thought a single document could turn an entire family speechless, but here we are. 7 years ago, I married the love of my life. Back then, I was working 2 jobs just to make rent on my studio apartment, driving a 15-year-old Honda with a broken air conditioner, and wearing the same 3 dress shirts to every family gathering. Her family never let me forget it. The first Christmas dinner at her parents' house, her uncle made a joke about how I probably couldn't afford to bring wine, so he brought extra. Her aunt would constantly ask my wife if she was sure about marrying someone who might not be able to provide the lifestyle she deserves. Her cousin would introduce me to people as the guy who married up. But the worst was her father, who would pat me on the back and call me son in front of others, then pull my wife aside and whisper about prenups and protecting family assets. My wife always defended me. She'd tell them that money didn't matter, that we were building something together, that they should give me a chance. But I could see the doubt creeping in during those long, quiet drives home after family events. She never said anything, but the way she'd stare out the window told me everything. The thing is, they had no idea what I was actually working on during those late nights. While they assumed I was just grinding at dead-end jobs, I was developing software applications in my spare bedroom. 3 years into our marriage, I finally got my breakthrough when a tech company bought one of my programs for a substantial amount. But I kept quiet about it, living the same modest lifestyle, banking everything, and continuing to work on new projects. By year 5, I had sold 2 more applications and was making more in royalties than most people make in salaries. But I still drove the same car, wore the same clothes, and listened to the same comments at every family gathering. My wife knew we were doing better financially. Our bills were always paid. We'd moved to a nicer apartment, and I'd started contributing more to our joint savings. But I never revealed the full extent of what I was earning. Last year, everything changed. A major corporation offered to buy my entire portfolio and hire me as their chief technology consultant. The contract was worth more money than I'd ever imagined possible. Suddenly, I wasn't just comfortable, I was wealthy. Really wealthy. That's when I decided it was time to make some changes. I bought us a house in the nicest part of town, the kind of place her family had always lived in, but somehow still made comments about us never being able to afford. I surprised my wife with a new car, nothing too flashy, just reliable and new. I started dressing better, not designer clothes, but quality pieces that actually fit properly. Her family's reaction was immediate and predictable. Suddenly, the comments changed. Now her uncle was asking about investment opportunities. Her aunt wanted to know if I could help her son get a job in tech. Her cousin started inviting me to golf tournaments and business networking events. Her father began treating me like his long-lost son, bragging about my success to his friends as if he'd always believed in me. But the most interesting change was in the family conversations about money. Suddenly, everyone seemed to have forgotten about the prenup they'd insisted we sign before our wedding. They'd start talking about family assets and inheritance as if I'd always been included in those discussions. Her mother began making comments about how our money should be invested, how we should think about buying property together, how the family should stick together financially. The breaking point came 3 weeks ago. Her aunt called and asked if she could bring someone to our monthly family dinner. She said it was a family friend who was also a lawyer, someone who could give us all some good advice about managing wealth and family finances. My wife thought it sounded helpful and agreed. I knew exactly what was happening, but I decided to let it play out. The dinner was at our new house, which made the whole situation even more ironic. Here they were, sitting around my dining room table, eating food I'd paid for, planning to ambush me with legal advice about protecting their financial interests. The lawyer was smooth, I'll give him that. He started by complimenting our home, asking about our investment strategies, making small talk about the challenges of managing sudden wealth. Then he gradually steered the conversation toward estate planning and asset protection. He began explaining how important it is for families to have clear legal frameworks when there's significant money involved. He talked about how marriages can complicate inheritance issues, how prenups become less relevant over time, how family wealth should really belong to the whole family. Her aunt was nodding along enthusiastically. Her father was making agreeable sounds, and her mother kept looking at my wife with encouraging smiles. Then he turned to me directly and started talking about how the prenup we'd signed years ago was probably outdated, given our changed financial circumstances. He suggested we might want to consider some adjustments to our legal arrangements, maybe set up some trusts, think about how to better integrate our finances with the extended family's long-term planning. Everyone around the table was watching me carefully. I could feel their expectation, their assumption that I'd be grateful for their guidance, that I'd be eager to share what I'd built with the same people who'd spent years treating me like a charity case they were stuck with. I listened to the whole presentation, nodding politely, asking a few questions that seemed appropriately interested. When he finished, there was this moment of silence where everyone was waiting for my response. That's when I smiled and told them I had something to show them. I went to my office and came back with my laptop bag. The same worn, black bag I'd been carrying to family gatherings for years, the one her uncle used to make jokes about looking like it came from a thrift store. I set it on the dining room table and unzipped it slowly. Everyone leaned forward slightly, probably expecting to see some financial documents or legal papers that would facilitate whatever they were planning. Instead, I pulled out a manila folder and set it in front of the lawyer. I told him I appreciated his advice, but I already had excellent legal representation. Then I opened the folder and spread out the contents for everyone to see. The first document was our prenup, the same one they'd insisted on 7 years ago. I'd highlighted several key sections, including the clause about assets acquired during marriage belonging to whoever earned them, and the provision that specifically stated my wife would waive any claim to my business income or intellectual property. The second document was a detailed financial statement showing my exact net worth, including all income sources, investments, and asset valuations. The number was larger than any of them had imagined. The third document was a letter from my attorney, outlining how the prenup was not only still legally binding, but actually protected me from having to share any of my wealth with extended family members who had no legal claim to it whatsoever. The fourth document was the most interesting one. It was a detailed record I'd been keeping for years of every insult, every snide comment, every attempt to make me feel inferior at family gatherings. Dates, times, witnesses, exact quotes when I could remember them. 7 years of documentation showing how this family had treated me before they knew I had money. I told them this was my insurance policy, not against my wife, who had always defended me and who I trusted completely, but against the kind of people who would bring a lawyer to dinner to try to manipulate their way into someone else's bank account. The lawyer's face went completely white. He started backtracking immediately, claiming this wasn't what they'd intended, that they just wanted to make sure everyone was properly protected. He packed up his papers quickly and left without finishing dinner. Her aunt tried to laugh it off, saying they were just looking out for family, that they'd always cared about me. I reminded her of the time she told people at a wedding that I was probably using her niece as a stepping stone to a better life. Her father attempted to pivot into proud patriarch mode, talking about how he'd always known I had potential, how he'd just been testing my character all these years. I brought up the conversation where he'd told his brother that I'd probably leave his daughter once I found someone more suitable to my station. One by one, they all tried to rewrite history, to pretend their years of condescension and dismissal had been some kind of tough love or character-building exercise. But I had receipts, literal receipts in some cases, and I wasn't letting anyone off the hook. My wife sat quietly through most of this, watching her family squirm as I methodically dismantled their attempts at damage control. She knew I was right. She'd heard all the comments too, had defended me against them countless times. When her mother tried to pull her aside to talk sense into me, my wife told her that I was her husband, that she was proud of what I'd accomplished, and that anyone who couldn't respect me didn't deserve to be part of our lives. The dinner ended with most of the family leaving early, making awkward excuses and promising to talk more later. The house felt peaceful after they left. Update 1. The aftermath was swift and predictable. Within a week, I received calls from various family members trying different approaches. Her cousin wanted to apologize and talk about moving forward. Her uncle suggested we all just put the past behind us and focus on being family. Her mother thought I was being unnecessarily harsh, and that family should forgive and forget. But the most interesting call came from her father. He wanted to meet privately, just the two of us, to have a man-to-man conversation about the family dynamics. I agreed. curious to see how he'd try to spin 7 years of disrespect. We met at a coffee shop downtown. He started by acknowledging that maybe the family had been a little hard on me in the early years. He explained that they were just protective of his daughter, that they wanted to make sure she was with someone who could take care of her. He said they never meant any real harm, that it was just their way of looking out for family. Then he got to his real point. He was worried about what this conflict might do to his relationship with his daughter. He'd noticed that she'd been distant since the dinner, that she wasn't returning calls as quickly, that she seemed to be taking my side in the family dispute. He wanted to know what it would take to smooth things over. I told him the truth. The money had never been the point. I could have lived my entire life being called the charity case if they'd just treated me with basic human respect. What bothered me wasn't that they doubted my earning potential. It was that they actively tried to make me feel inferior, to convince my wife that she'd made a mistake, to treat me like an outsider who didn't belong in their family. I explained that their current interest in reconciliation was transparently financial. None of them had reached out to apologize for years of disrespect. They were only concerned now because they realized I had something they wanted access to. He asked what I wanted from them. What kind of apology would be sufficient? I told him I didn't want apologies from people who were only sorry they'd misjudged my bank account. I wanted them to understand that money doesn't change who someone is as a person. The same character traits that had made me successful, persistence, discipline, integrity, hard work, were the same ones I'd had when I was broke. They'd just chosen not to see them. Update 2. Things escalated when her aunt decided to take a different approach. She started calling my wife directly, trying to convince her that I was being vindictive and divisive, that I was trying to turn her against her own family. She suggested that my sudden wealth had changed me, that I was becoming arrogant and controlling. This backfired spectacularly. My wife had watched her family treat me poorly for years. She'd defended me countless times, had fought with them about their attitude toward me, had been embarrassed by their behavior at social events. Now they were trying to paint me as the problem for finally standing up for myself. My wife called a family meeting without me. She told them exactly what she thought of their behavior, both past and present. She reminded them of specific incidents they'd probably hoped she'd forgotten. She told them that if they couldn't respect her husband, they couldn't have a relationship with her either. Her mother cried. Her father got angry and accused me of manipulating his daughter. Her aunt said the family was being torn apart over money and pride. Her uncle tried to play mediator, suggesting everyone just needed to calm down and work things out. But my wife held firm. She told them they had a choice. Treat me with the same respect they'd show any other family member, or lose access to both of us. No more conditional acceptance, no more backhanded comments, no more treating me like a second-class member of the family. Update 3. The resolution came from an unexpected source. Her grandmother, who had been mostly quiet during all the family drama, asked to speak with me privately. At 92, she was the family matriarch, the one person everyone still listened to and respected. She told me she'd been watching the family dynamics for years and had been disappointed in how I'd been treated. She said she'd grown up poor herself, had married a man her family initially disapproved of, and understood what it felt like to be judged by people who should have been supportive. She also told me something I hadn't known. She'd been quietly proud of how I'd handled their criticism, how I'd continued to show up to family events despite their attitude, how I'd always been respectful even when they weren't. She'd noticed my work ethic, my dedication to my wife, my character in ways that others had overlooked. But most importantly, she told me she was proud of my wife for finally standing up to the family. She said it was long overdue, that the family had gotten too comfortable being cruel under the guise of protection and concern. She asked me what I needed from the family to move forward. I told her the same thing I'd told her son. I needed them to understand that respect isn't conditional on financial status, that they owed me basic human dignity regardless of what was in my bank account, and that their sudden interest in me was transparently motivated by money. She nodded and said she'd handle it. 2 days later, I received individual calls from each family member. Not group apologies or family meeting apologies, but personal, individual acknowledgments of how they'd treated me. Her father admitted he'd been wrong to judge my worthiness based on my income. Her mother acknowledged that she'd made me feel unwelcome in ways that were unnecessary and hurtful. Her aunt admitted that many of her comments had been cruel and that she'd been motivated by her own insecurities about money and status. They weren't perfect apologies, and I could tell some of them were prompted by grandmother's intervention rather than genuine remorse. But they were specific. They acknowledged actual behavior rather than vague misunderstandings, and they didn't include excuses or justifications. More importantly, the behavior changed. At the next family gathering, I was included in conversations naturally, without the undercurrent of judgment that had been there before. No one made comments about my clothes or car or background. Her cousin actually asked me about my work because he was genuinely interested, not because he wanted something from me. The lawyer never came to another dinner. Looking back, I realized the prenup they'd insisted on had actually protected me in ways they'd never intended. They'd been so worried about my wife's assets that they'd inadvertently ensured I'd never have to share my success with people who'd spent years trying to convince her she'd married beneath her station. My wife and I are stronger now. Going through this together, having her choose me over her family's financial pressure, watching her stand up for our marriage when it really mattered, it proved something that all the money in the world couldn't buy. And her family learned something too. Respect isn't something you can retroactively earn by being nice to someone after you find out they're wealthy. Character doesn't change based on bank account balances. And treating people poorly always comes with consequences, even if those consequences are delayed by several years and arrive in the form of a worn laptop bag at a family dinner. The irony isn't lost on me that the same document they'd pushed for to protect their assets ended up being the thing that protected mine. Sometimes the best revenge is just letting people experience the natural consequences of their own choices. These days, family dinners are actually pleasant. We talk about normal things, work, hobbies, current events, without the underlying tension that used to make every gathering feel like a performance where I was always auditioning for their approval. I still carry the same laptop bag,